Hello everyone, welcome back to today's reading. And as you all know, the book we're reading is The Psychology of Money. If you're just joining us today on this channel, on this reading channel, you're welcome. You're welcome to where you would be able to learn and grow and become a better version of yourself. And if you've been here before, if you've been on this journey with us right from time, or you joined us in the middle of the journey, welcome to today's reading. So what we are reading today is Room for Error. Some of the best examples of smart financial behavior can be found in an unlikely place, Las Vegas casinos. Not among all players, of course, but a tiny group of blackjack players who practice card counting can teach ordinary people something extraordinarily important about managing money, the importance of room for error. Now, let's dive into what we have. The fundamentals of blackjack card counting are simple. 1. No one can know with certainty what card the dealer will draw next. 2. But by tracking what cards can have already been dealt, you can calculate what cards remain in the deck. Doing so can tell you the odds of a particular card being drawn by the dealer. As a player, you bet more when the odds of getting a card you want are in your favor and less when they are against you. The mechanics of how this is done don't matter here. What matters is that a blackjack card counter knows they are playing a game of odds, not certainties. In any particular hand, they think they have a good chance of being right, but know there is a decent chance they are wrong. It might sound strange given their profession, but their strategy relies entirely on humility. Humility that they don't know and cannot know exactly what's going to happen next. So play their hand accordingly. The card counting system works because it tilts the odds ever so lightly from the house to the player, but bet so heavily even when the odds seem in your favor, and if you are wrong, you might lose so much that you don't have enough money to keep playing. There is never a moment when you are right that you can bet every ship in front of you. The world isn't that kind to anyone, not consistently anyways. You have to give yourself room for errors. You have to plan on your plan, not going according to the plan. Kevin Lewis, a successful card counter portrayed in the book Bringing Down the House, wrote more about this philosophy. Although card counting is statistically proven to work, it does not guarantee you will win every hand, let alone every trip you make to the casino. We must make sure that we have enough money to withstand any swing of bad luck. Let's assume you have roughly a 2% edge over the casino. That still means the casino will win 49% of the time. Therefore, you need to have enough money to withstand any variant swing against you. A rule of thumb is that you should have at least 100 basic units. Assuming you start with a $10,000, you could comfortably play $100 unit. History is littered with good ideas taken too far, which are indistinguishable from bad ideas. The wisdom in having room for error is acknowledging that uncertainty, randomness, and chance, the unknowns, are an ever present part of life. The only way to deal with them is by increasing the gap between what you think will happen and what can happen while still leaving you capable of fighting for another day. Benjamin Graham is known for his concept of margin of safety. He wrote about it extensively and in mathematical detail. But my favorite summary of the theory came when he mentioned in an interview that the purpose of the margin of safety is to render the forecast unnecessary. It is hard to overstate how much power lies in that simple statement. Margin of safety. You can also call it room for error or redundancy. It is the only effective way to safely navigate a world that is governed by odds, not certainties. And almost everything related to money exists in that kind of world. Forecasting with precision is hard. This is obvious to the card counter because no one could possibly know where a particular card lies in a shuffled deck. It is less obvious to someone asking What will the average annual return of the stock market be over the next 10 years? Or on what date will I be able to retire? But they are fundamentally the same. The best we can do is think about odds. Graham's margin of safety is a simple suggestion that we don't need to view the world in front of us as black or white, predictable or a crapshoot. The gray area, pursuing things where a range of potential outcomes are acceptable, is the smart way to proceed. But people underestimate the need for room for error in almost everything they do that involves money. Stock analysts give their clients price targets, not price ranges. Economic forecasters predict things with precise figures, rarely broad probabilities. The pundits who speak in unshakable certainties will gain a larger following than the one who says we can't know for sure and speak in probabilities. We do this in all kinds of financial endeavors, especially those related to our own decisions. Harvard psychologist Max Bazerman once showed that when analyzing other people's home renovation plans, most people estimate the project will run between 25% and 50% over budget. But when it comes to their own projects, people estimate that renovations will be completed on time and at budget. Oh, the eventual disappointment. Two things cause us to avoid room for error. One is the idea that somebody must know what the future holds, driven by the uncomfortable feeling that comes from admitting the opposite. The second is that you are therefore doing yourself harm by not taking actions that fully exploit an accurate view of that future coming true. Room for error is underappreciated and misunderstood. Less of it is often viewed as a conservative edge used by those who don't want to take much risks or aren't confident in their views. But when used appropriately, it is quite the opposite. Room for error lets you endure a range of potential outcomes, and endurance lets you stick around long enough to let the odds of benefiting from a low probability outcome fall in your favor. The biggest gains occur infrequently, either because the biggest gains occur infrequently, either because they don't happen often or because they take time to compound. So the person with enough room for error in part of their strategy, that's like cash, to let them endure hardship in another, that's stocks, has an edge over the person who gets wiped out. Game over. Insert more tokens when they are wrong. Bill Gates understood this well. When Microsoft was a young company, he said he came up with this incredibly conservative approach that I wanted to have enough money in the bank to pay a year's worth of payroll, even if we didn't get any payment coming in. Buffett expressed the similar idea when he told Berkshire Hathaway shareholders in 2008, I have pledged to you, the rating agencies and myself, to always run Berkshire with more than ample cash. When forced to choose, I will not trade even a night's sleep for the chance of extra profit. There are a few specific places for investors to think about room for error. One is volatility. Can you survive your assets declining by 30%? On a spreadsheet, maybe yes. In terms of actually paying your bills and staying cash flow positive, but what about mentally? It is easy to underestimate what a 30% decline does to your psyche. Your confidence may become short at the very moment opportunity is at its highest. You or your spouse may decide it is time for a new plan or a new career. I know several investors who quit after losses because they were exhausted. Spreadsheets are good at telling you when the numbers do and don't add up. They are not good at modeling how you will feel when you tuck your kids in at night, wondering if the investment decisions you've made were a mistake that will hurt their future. Having a gap between what you can technically endure versus what is emotionally possible is an overlooked version of room for error. Another is saving for retirement. We can look at history and see, for example, that the US stock market has returned on annual average of 6.8% after inflation since the 1870s. It is a reasonable first approximation to use that as an estimate of what to expect on your own diversified portfolio when saving for retirement. You can choose those return assumptions to back into the amount of money you would need to save each month to achieve your target. But what if the future returns are lower? Or what if long-term history is a good estimate of the long-term future, but your target retirement date ends up falling in the middle of a brutal bear market like 2009? What if a future bear market scares you out of stocks and you end up missing a future bull market? So the returns you actually earn are less than the market average. What if you need cash out of your retirement account in your 30s to pay for a medical mishap? The answer to those what ifs is you won't be able to retire like you once predicted, which can be a disaster. The solution is simple. Use room for error when estimating your future returns. This is more art than science. For my own investment, which I will describe more in chapter 20, I will earn in my lifetime will be one third lower than the historic average. So I save more than I would if I assume the future will resemble the past. It is my margin of safety. The future may be worse than one third lower than the past, but no margin of safety offers a 100% guarantee. A one third buffer is enough to allow me to sleep well at night. And if the future does resemble the past, I will be pleasantly surprised. The best way to achieve felicity is to aim low, says Charlie Munger. Wonderful. An important cousin for room for error is what I call optimism bias in risk taking, or Russian roulette should statistically work syndrome. Wow. Or Russian roulette should statistically work syndrome. An attachment to favorable odds when the downside is unacceptable in any circumstances. Nassim Taleb says you can be risk loving and yet completely averse to ruin. And indeed, you should. The idea is that you have to take risks to get ahead, but no risk that can wipe you out is ever worth taking. The odds are in your favor when playing Russian roulette. But the downside is not towards the potential upside. There is no margin of safety that can compensate the risks. Same with money. Same with money. The odds of many lucrative things are in your favor. Real estate prices go up most years, and during most years, you will get a paycheck every other week. But if something has 95% odds of being right, the 5% odds of being wrong means you will almost certainly experience the downside at some point in your life. And if the cost of the downside is ruin, the upside, the other 95% of the time, likely isn't worth the risk, no matter how appealing it looks. Leverage is the devil here. Leverage. Taking a debt to make your money go further pushes routine risks into something capable of producing ruin. The danger is that rational optimism most of the time marks the odds of ruin most of the time. The result is we systematically underestimate risk. Housing prices fell 30% last decade. A few companies defaulted on their debt. That is capitalism. It happens. But those with high leverage had a double wipeout. Not only were they left broke, being wiped out erased every opportunity to get back in the game at the very moment opportunity was ripe. A homeowner wiped out in 2009 had no chance of taking advantage of cheap mortgage rates in 2010. Lehman Brothers had no chance of investing in cheap debt in 2009. They were done. To get around this, I think of my money as barbelled. I take risks with one portion and I'm terrified with the other. This is not inconsistent, but the psychology of money would lead you to believe that it is. I just want to ensure that I can remain standing long enough for my risks to pay off. You have to survive to succeed. Wow. You have to survive to succeed. To repeat a point we've made a few times in this book, the ability to do what you want, when you want, for as long as you want, has an infinite ROI, return of investment. Room for error does more than just widen the target around what you might think might happen. It also helps protect you from things you had never imagined, which can be the most troublesome events we face. The Battle of Stalingrad during World War II was the largest battle in history. With it came equally staggering stories of how people dealt with risks. One came in late 1942 when a German tank unit sat in reserve on grassland outside the city. When tanks were desperately needed on the front lines, something happened that surprised everyone. Almost none of them worked. Out of 104 tanks in the unit, fewer than 20 were operable. Engineers quickly found the issue. Historian William Craig writes, during the weeks of the inactivity behind the front lines, field mice had nested inside the vehicles and eaten away insulation covering the electrical system. Yet, Germans had the most sophisticated equipment in the world, yet they were defeated by mice. You can imagine their disbelief. This almost certainly never crossed their minds. What kind of tank designer thinks about mouse protection? Not a reasonable one, and not one who studied tank history. But these kinds of things happen all the time. You can plan for every risk except the things that are too crazy to cross your mind. And those crazy things can do the most harm because they happen more often than you think and you have no plan for how to deal with them. In 2006, Warren Buffett announced a search for his eventual replacement. He said he needed someone genetically programmed to recognize and avoid serious risks, including those never before encountered. I have seen this skill at work with Startup My Friend. Collaborative fund has backed. Ask a founder to list the biggest risks they face, and the usual suspects are mentioned. But beyond the predictable struggles of running a setup, here are a few issues we've dealt with among our portfolio companies. 1. Water pipes broke, flooding and ruining a company's office. 2. A company's office was broken into 3 times. 3. A company was kicked out of its manufacturing plant. 4. A store was shut down after a customer called the health department because she didn't like that another customer brought a dog inside. And 5. A CEO's email was spoofed in the middle of a fundraise that required all of his attention. And in 6. A founder had a mental breakdown. Several of these events were existential to the company's future, but none were foreseeable because none had previously happened to the CEOs dealing with these problems, or anyone else they knew for that matter. It was uncharted territory. Avoiding these kinds of unknown risks is almost by definition impossible. You can't prepare for what you can't envision. If there is one way to guard against the damage, it is avoiding single points of failure. A good rule of thumb for a lot of things in life is that everything that can break will eventually break. So, if many things rely on one thing working and that thing breaks, you are counting the days to catastrophe. That's a single point of failure. Some people are remarkably good at avoiding single points of failure. Most critical systems on airplanes have backups, and the backups often have backups. Modern jets have 4 redundant electrical systems. You can fly with one engine and technically land with none, as every jet must be capable of stopping on a runway with its brakes alone, without thrust reverse from its engines. Suspension bridges can similarly lose many of their cables without falling. The biggest single point of failure with money is a sole reliance on a paycheck to fund short-term spending needs, with no savings to create a gap between what you think your expenses are and what they might be in the future. The trick that often goes overlooked, even by the wealthiest, what we saw in chapter 10, realizing that you don't need a specific reason to save. It is fine to save for a car, a home, or for retirement, but it is equally important to save for things you can't possibly predict or even comprehend, the financial equivalent of field mice. Predicting what you will use your savings for assumes you live in a world where you know exactly what your future expenses will be, which no one does. I save a lot and I have no idea what I will use the savings for in the future. Few financial plans that only prepare for known risks have enough margin of safety to survive in the real world. In fact, the most important part of every plan is planning on your plan not going according to the plan. Now, let me show you how this applies to you. Chapter 14, you will change. Long-term planning is harder than it seems because people's goals and desires change over time. I grew up with a friend who came from neither privileged nor natural intellect, but was the hardest working guy I knew. These people have a lot to teach because they have an unfiltered understanding of every inch of the road to success. His life mission and dream as a teenager was to be a doctor. To say the odds were stacked against him is being charitable. No reasonable person at the time would consider it a possibility, but he pushed, and a decade older than his classmates, he eventually became a doctor. How much fulfillment comes from starting from nothing, bulldozing your way to the top of medical schools, and achieving one of the most noble professions against all odds? I spoke to him a few years ago. The conversation went like this. Me, long time no talk, how you doing? Him, awful career. Me, well, him, awful career, man. This went on for 10 minutes. The stress and hours had worn him to the ground. It seemed as disappointment as where he is today as he was driven towards where he wanted to be 15 years ago. An underpinning of psychology is that people are poor forecasters of their future selves. Imagining a goal is easy and fun. Imagining a goal in the context of realistic life choices that grow with competitive pursuit is something entirely different. This has a big impact on our ability to plan for future financial goals. Every 5-year-old boy wants to drive a tractor when they grow up. Few jobs look better in the eyes of a young boy's idea of a good job begins and ends with vroom vroom beep beep big tractor, here I come. Then many grow up and realize that driving a tractor maybe isn't the best career. Maybe they want something more prestigious or lucrative. So as a teenager, they dream of being a lawyer. Now they think they know their plan is set. Law school and its cost, yeah, it law school and its cost, yeah, will come. Then as a lawyer, they face such long working hours that they rarely see their families. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be able to speak up for the less privileged. I want to be a lawyer so I can fight for people who can't do it on their own. I can stand up to people who feel they can oppress people with the power. Law school cost, here I come, and I have to just let it go, let it go. Okay, so perhaps they take a lower paying job with flexible hours, then they realize that childcare is so expensive that it consumes most of their paycheck, and they opt out to be a stay-at-home parent. This, they conclude, is finally the right choice. Then at age 70, they realize that a lifetime of staying home means they are unprepared to afford retirement. Many of us went through life on a similar trajectory. Only 27% of college grads have a job related to their major, according to the Federal Reserve. 29% of stay-at-home parents have a college degree. Few likely regret their education, of course, but we should acknowledge that a new parent in their 30s may think about life goals in a way their 18-year-old self making career goals would never imagine. Long-term financial planning is essential, but things change, both the world around you and your own goals and desires. It is one thing to say, you don't know what the future holds. It is another to admit that you yourself don't know today what you will even want in the future. And the truth is, few of us do. It is hard to make enduring long-term decisions when your view of what you will want in the future is likely to shift. The end of history illusion is what psychologists call the tendency for people to be keenly aware of how much they've changed in the past and to underestimate how much their personalities, desires, and goals are likely to change in the future. Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert once said, at every stage of our lives, we make decisions that will profoundly influence the lives of the people we are going to become. And then we become those people. We are not always thrilled with the decisions we made. So young people pay good money to get tattoos removed that teenagers paid good money to get. Middle-aged people rush to divorce people who young adults rushed to marry. Older adults work hard to lose what middle-aged adults worked hard to gain. On and on and on the list goes. All of us, he said, are walking around with an illusion that history, our personal history, has just come to an end, and that the people that we were always meant to be and will be for the rest of our lives. We tend to never learn this lesson. Gilbert's research shows people from age 18 to 68 underestimate how much they will change in the future. You can see how this impacts a long-term financial plan. Charlie Munger says the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. But how do you not interrupt a money plan? Careers, investment, spending, budgeting, whatever. When what you want out of life changes, it is hard. Part of the reason people like Ronald Reid, the wealthy janitor we met earlier in the book, I can't remember him, and Warren Buffett has become so successful is because they kept doing the same thing for decades on end, letting compounding run wild. But many of us evolve on so much over a lifetime that we don't want to keep doing the same thing for decades on end or anything close to it. So rather than 180 something year lifespan, our money has perhaps four distinct 20-year blocks. I know young people who purposely live austere lives with little income and they are perfectly happy with it. Then there are those who work their tails off to pay for a life of luxury and they are perfectly happy with that. Both have risks. The former risks being unprepared to raise a family or fund retirement. The latter risks regret that you spend your useful and healthy years in a cubicle. There is no easy solution to this problem. Tell a 5-year-old boy he should be a lawyer instead of a tractor driver, and he will disagree with every cell in his body. But there are two things to keep in mind when making what you think are long-term decisions. One, we should avoid the extreme ends of financial planning. Assuming you'll be happy with a very low income or choosing to work endless hours in pursuit of a high one, increase the odds that you will one day find yourself at a point of regret. The full of the end of history illusion is that people adapt to most circumstances, so the benefit of an extreme plan, the simplicity of having hardly anything, or the thrill of having almost everything, wear off. But the downside of those extremes, not being able to afford retirement or looking back at a life spent devoted to chasing dollars, become enduring regret. Regrets are especially painful when you abandon a previous plan and feel like you have to run in the other direction twice as fast to make up for lost time. Compounding works best when you give a plan years or decades to grow. This is true for not only savings but careers and relationships. Endurance is key. And when you consider our tendency to change who we are over time, balance at every point in your life becomes a strategy to avoid future regrets and encourage endurance. Aiming at every point in your working life to have moderate annual savings, moderate free time, no more than a moderate commute, and at least moderate time with your family increases the odds of being able to stick with a plan and avoid regret than if any one of those things fall to the extreme side of the spectrum. Two, we should also come to accept the reality of changing our minds. Some of the most miserable workers I have met are people who stay loyal to a career only because it is a field they picked when deciding on a college major at age 18. When you accept the end of history illusion, you realize that the odds of picking a job when you are not old enough to drink that you will still enjoy when you are old enough to qualify for social security are low. The trick is to accept the reality of change and move on as soon as possible. Jason Zweig, the Wall Street Journal investment columnist, worked with psychologist Daniel Kahneman on writing Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Zweig once told a story about a personality quirk of Kahneman's that served him well. Nothing amazed me more about Danny than his ability to detonate what we had just done. Zweig wrote, he and Kahneman could work endlessly on a chapter, but the next thing you know, Kahneman sends a version so utterly transformed that it is unrecognizable. It begins differently, it ends differently, it incorporates anecdotes and evidence you would never have thought of. It draws on research that you've never heard of. When I asked Danny how he could start again if he had never written an earlier draft, Zweig continued. He said, the words I have never forgotten, I have no sunk cost. Sunk cost, anchoring decisions to past efforts that can't be refunded. Are a devil in a world where people change over time. They make our future selves prisoner to our past different selves. It's the equivalent of a stranger making major life decisions for you. Embracing the idea that financial goals made when you were a different person should be abandoned without mercy versus put on life support and dragged on can be a good strategy to minimize future regrets. The quicker it is done, the sooner you can get back to compounding. Next, let's talk about compounding's price of admission, which is nothing is free. Everything has a price, but not all prices appears on label. And the end of that chapter, nothing is free. It ends with find the price and then pay it. We are going to read it at our next reading. So for now, go through this, mull over it, digest it, and then join us for the next reading so as not to miss out. See you at our next reading. Take care of yourself and be good. Bye.